Good evening, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. We are back for another meeting of Diverse Minds with Keisha Hamilton, and I am your host, Keisha Hamilton. Here at a meeting of Diverse Minds, we explore racial equity from a historically authentic lens. This means that that history forms our perspective, it guides our responses, and it is the roadmap that we use to ensure change for the future. It's the roadmap that we use to ensure that the tactics that we use, the conversations that we have, the focus that the light that we shine different things on, that we're focusing on those right things. History informs our actions and our thought processes here on a meeting of Diverse Minds with Keisha Hamilton. We use the history of Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, their voices to guide our efforts, to guide our processes, to guide our thought processes, our actions, our methods. You know, we listen to Black and brown individuals throughout history to guide us in that way here on another meeting of Diverse Minds with Keisha Hamilton. We rely heavily on Black experiences as our voice is the voice that is the least responded to, the most notably ignored, the most notably disregarded, and we show respect to all marginalized experiences at the same time. We recognize that Black voices especially and specifically are the voices that society chooses to ignore the most. While we don't participate or encourage suppression and oppression Olympics, we recognize that there are some voices that have been more marginalized, and hearing from those voices is what we should be doing. And that's what we recognize on a meeting of Diverse Minds with Keisha Hamilton. This show is an extension of Diverse Minds Consulting, LLC. You can find us at www.diversemindsconsulting.com, where we do consultations, one-on-one. We do whole group trainings, cohort trainings. We do book study groups. This is the only free service. This right now, you are watching a meeting of Diverse Minds with Keisha Hamilton. This is the only free service that Diverse Minds Consulting offers. We do offer these weekly conversations as a free service because we are committed to racial equity in everything. We realize, we recognize, we promote that when racial equity when we're using that as a lens to make decisions, to guide our efforts, to guide our responses, to guide our solutions, then we'll be actually getting to the heart of the problems, of all problems. We do believe that race impacts everything. You know, history tells us that the individuals who set this nation up, who conquered much of the world, from their conquer, I use quotation marks on purpose, but who conquered much of the world, did that by suppressing and being very specific and intentional about separating according to race. So they used racism in order to set this nation up. So we realize that the only way that we can correct much of what's wrong in the world today is to address things through a critical racial lens, looking at everything through that critical racial lens, seeing how is race impacting this, and then addressing and fixing for that. So again, this show, A Meeting of Diverse Minds with Keisha Hamilton, it acknowledges that and it recognizes that. But we do, because we are so committed to this work, we do offer this as a free service. You can donate to this free service, this free service that we provide, A Meeting of Diverse Minds with Keisha Hamilton on Wednesdays. You can donate so that these shows can continue and so that we can continue to provide content that you can use in your organizations and in your churches, in your families, in your personal relationships that will help you to become more racially equitable in everything that you do. The show does have two purposes. The first one is that this is a place where Black, Indigenous, and other folks of color, we want them to be able to come and to share their experiences, share suggestions, share commentary. We want them to feel safe on this show. We want, when Black and brown and Indigenous people tune in, that they find something that resonates with them. Thankfully, when we have our conversations, and I'm so grateful for those of you who, let me know that you watch the show and also that the information that's shared on here, that it resonates, that it's true, that it's your life, it's the things that you're dealing with, and the solutions that I provide that are coming from a historical lens and from much of our own experiences also resonates with you. This show is designed for that. That's the first way that this show is designed. Second, this show is for white individuals. It's a gem, it's a jewel, it's a hidden treasure for whiteness and white people, and those who are still committed to whiteness and trying to come out of that. A lot of people who there's a high level of a lack of education when it comes to racial equity, racism, race, and history, and how these things have informed and shaped our world. So this show provides a lot of history, a lot of historical knowledge. It provides, the information for whiteness. Again, that's a culture of whiteness. So the individuals can, come on here, those who are committed to whiteness or who have grown up in it and that's all they know, but they're trying to get up out of that and trying to change that, trying to see true transformation. This show it provides the tools, it provides the terminology, it provides the historical context in order for you to be able to make those changes in your lives, your personal relationships, your organizations, and your businesses, even your churches as well. Again, we talk about anti-racism, diversity, equity, inclusion on here. White folks, you all are invited to join, to ask questions, when appropriate, to join the conversation when appropriate, ask questions, and then more importantly, listen, learn, and then apply the different things that you're learning from here. It's one thing for us to hear and listen all day. It's another thing for us to go out and practice and to begin to attempt to master what we're learning. And that's what this show is designed and hopeful that individuals will do upon listening, and receiving all the information here. And lastly, this is a safe and courageous space for, all folks who are choosing to join. We're historically authentic, which means that the conversation does not come from, just the top of our head. It does come from history. It comes from historical experiences of Black and Brown individuals. It comes from history, actual history. There's 400 plus years of a lack of racial equity just in the nation of America that we draw on. We sometimes look at world issues and how, whiteness has impacted our world and how it's shaped different things, but mostly from, just America. But so not only are we talking history, it's historically authentic. The authentic part is that you're not gonna, in the safe and courageous, this space is not designed so that you will remain comfortable. Comfort does not allow us to grow, until we're uncomfortable, until we're stretching ourselves, until we're agitating ourselves just enough, we won't be changing. So the courageous and authenticness of this space, it doesn't seek to satisfy or fit within, the cultural norms that you all are accustomed to right now. We are intentional about ensuring that we are staying as committed to our true selves as we can be. One thing that I think humans can agree on together, all of us can always be learning. Right. And in that, even as anti-racism, diversity, equity, inclusion practitioners, specialists, we're all still learning. I'm continually feeding my mind with, anti-racism, diversity, equity, inclusion information. I'm continually going to Black and Brown individuals who are teaching this work and who are doing research like I'm doing research, to ensure that I am staying, that I'm not, conforming to white ideology. Please forgive the background noise. My children are home tonight. Usually they're not, but they are. And sometimes they forget that I am live when I'm live. I live here, so, it just kind of happens. But yes, I'm sorry. I kind of lost my thought, but yes. So again, we're historically authentic. We are very committed to ensuring that the message that you get is one of authenticity. It's not designed for this space to be polite. So, we're always professional, but again, depending on which professional lens you're looking through, we may or may not, fit within it. And we're okay with that here on this a meeting of Diverse Minds with Keisha Hamilton. All right, let's get right into our definitions. Diversity, equity, inclusion, anti-racism. What are they, right? What are they, So what is diversity? Diversity is simply our difference. It not only relates to the skin tone that we have, the hair texture we have, the individuals that we choose to love, or our family sizes, or where we went to school or the teams that we root for, go blue. You know, it doesn't only relate to that difference that we all share. On a meeting of diverse minds with Keisha Hamilton, the difference that we highlight and that we like to lift up so that individuals can focus on it is the difference of ideology that we have. Ideology, that's how we think, that's why we think, and that's what the thinking that we have, how it plays out in our lives, why we make the decisions we make. It's how we think, it's how we were raised. It has everything to do with, you know, it has everything to do with, you know, the people that we were around, the messages that we received when we were younger, you know, that shaped why we are the people we are, you know, why we choose, why we value what we value. You know, you'll notice, you know, just in politics, you know, you all know I love politics. You know, we're just talking about Democrats and Republicans. You'll know that they have a different set of values that guide them. That is the ideology that we seek to address on a meeting of diverse minds with Keisha Hamilton. We recognize that we do have a different set of values. We do have a different set of ideologies as to why racism is still impacting us. And a lot of it does have to, I won't say a lot, some of it has to do with the lack of knowledge, which is why you have this free service that you can donate to. But, you know, a lot of it has to do with lack of accountability and authenticity, you know, as well. But again, that is what diversity is our difference. And a meeting of diverse minds with Keisha Hamilton seeks to get at the ideology that you have that difference more than anything. What is equity? Equity is acknowledging and being aware of barriers that exist, and then eliminating those barriers. And this is for people, so that people can be successful. And success, you know, it's defined relatively. So, you know, my success, what I consider to be success, may or may not be success to you, and that's okay. But me reaching what I feel to be success should not be paved or, you know, lined with a bunch of barriers. And you can't know what those barriers are or that they even exist if you don't have historical knowledge on equity. So for example, you know, let's just say two individuals need transportation. One person needs a car for whatever reason. One person needs a bike. Say the person who needs a bike lives closer to their job, and they already have a car, right? But they need a bike for whatever reason. Let's just say they actually just need a bike for whatever reason. And the other person, let's say they live further from their job, and so they need a car to get there. Equality, and I like to talk about equity versus equality because it's a good contrast and a good way to understand what they are and what they are not. Equality in our example would be me giving both the individuals who need this transportation, the one who needs a car, the one who needs a bike. Equality would be me giving both of them $10,000, say, because I'm trying to make sure that the person who needs a car gets a car, right? That's what equality does. So equality not only, you know, may or may not hit the mark generally, and I'm going to actually change my example, because most of the time equality does not hit the mark for the person who's in the greater need, okay, who has the higher need, who has the more costly need. Equality often does not meet that. So I'm going to change that example to two individuals who need transportation. One needs a bike, the other needs a car. Equality saying, I'm going to give both of you all $5,000. Okay, if you live in Michigan like I do, $5,000 is not generally a good enough amount, a decent amount. It's not a good amount for a vehicle, especially when you consider our winters, when you consider the need for tires, when you consider the insurance that we need to carry on it, when just when you consider all the things that happen to Michigan cars, okay? So equality would give both individuals a car because it's seeking to be equal. Equal is the same, right? Each part of whatever we're giving out, it has to be the same. Equity, which is different than equality. Equity says, I'm going to give this individual what they need. Equity acknowledges the barriers, it's aware of them. And it says, okay, you have this barrier of being at a distance that is much greater than this other individual. And so therefore you need a car. I'm going to give you $10,000 towards your car, because in Michigan, you can relatively get a decent car for $10,000, depending on, the size of the vehicle, et cetera. But that's not the point, of this example. But in Michigan, let's say we'll give this individual $10,000. We're going to give you $10,000 towards your car, for a car. I'm sorry, noise in the background. But then for the individual who needs a bike, Equity would say, you don't need $10,000 for a bike. I'm going to give you $2,000 for your bike. Let's say, so that you can get your bike permit, and whatever other items you need for your bike. Let's just say equity acknowledged that in order for you to be successful in obtaining this, $2,000 is sufficient. Okay, that's what equity says. Equity says, I'm not seeking to be fair. I'm not seeking to be equal. This is what equity is saying. Equity says, I am seeking to understand your barriers, understand your need, and then supply it, regardless to how that looks to anybody else. Equity is personalized, right? Equity is not, the person who's saying everybody gets one piece because that's just what I want to give everybody. Equity says, what do you need? And you're going to get that. Equity is equity is everything. Let me be clear and say that first. Equity is everything to anti-racism, diversity, equity, inclusion. If you have diverse, equitable, and inclusive practices, if you say you have those, then equity is the foundation of those practices. Equity has to be. There is no way to bring up, to equalize, anything that we have going on in our world without equity, without saying you have a higher barrier, and I'm going to meet that by providing the need that you have. Equity is also resisted by most whiteness and white people, and people who are, accustomed and comfortable with and committed to whiteness, because equity is unfair. A lot of times white individuals will say, and whiteness will say, that's not fair. You're giving them more. Because they need more, yes, they're getting more. While equality, it's not necessarily a good steward. It's just like, let's give y'all both $5,000. Well, you've given this person who needs a bike, let's just say he only needed $2,000 for his bike, but you gave him $5,000. You've given them $3,000 more money than they need for a vehicle, and you've given this other person who needed a car $5,000 less than they needed. And so you haven't met their need, and you've overmet this person's need. Equity acknowledges that those differences exist within individuals, that it must be personalized, and it seeks to personalize its response. I can talk about equity a lot because it is everything. We're going to go on to inclusion. Inclusion is having a seat at the table, specifically related to policy and decision making. So you all are fully aware, because we talk about this all the time, that when it comes to inclusion, while you can have, and we've talked about our the tea party set for the little girl, you have a 4 or 5 year old who's got a little round table and 4 or 5 chairs, let's say 4 chairs, 4 place settings with a tea party set on it, maybe some water in her tea cup, either plastic set or glass set, maybe some cookies from the kitchen that her mother or her parent allowed her to use for this tea party. And she is at the table with, let's say it's 4 chairs, and she's there in one seat herself, and the other 3 seats are her teddy bears. Her teddy bears are occupying all the other 3 seats. Usually and generally, what we have even today in inclusion, even today, this is September 8th, 2021, even today in inclusion, you have individuals who consider inclusion to be just like that. They want to have Black and brown individuals who sit like teddy bears around their table, just sitting, listening, and taking it in. Okay, that's the first level of it. The second level that we have of that would be Black and brown individuals who are like puppets. So imagine a puppet is on my hand, and somebody's puppeting and saying what they want to hear come out of that Black and brown individual's voice, out of their throat, right? That's what most inclusion is looking like today. That's what it looks like. That's not inclusion. Okay, I want to be clear. That is not true inclusion. That's not real inclusion. It's not authentic. It's not inclusion. Okay, we don't have to be real authentic. It's just not inclusion. That's puppeting, and that's a dog and pony show, as I heard today. That's that is just not inclusion. And actual inclusion is ensuring that, one, diverse voices, which again, we talk about the diversity of thought, diversity of ideology, diversity of values, that's represented at the table. That's one thing that you have to have in inclusion. The difference of thoughts and opinions, that the people should physically look different. Okay, there should be Black people around your table. There should be Indigenous people around your table. There should be Latina people around your table. There should be LGBTQ people around your table. Even though a meeting of diverse minds focuses on racial equity, we understand that there are always intersections in here. And these differences should be represented at your table in inclusion. Not only should they then, this difference, this physical difference be at your table, this thought difference should be represented at the table. Now, whatever we're creating, it should be as diverse as the thought processes that are around the table. It should be, so it won't look the same. I gave the example last week, I think of, I was in an organization, worked for an organization some time ago, and we were talking about our, PTO policy. And because their PTO policy was designed with whiteness in mind, and that would be, mom, dad, 2 kids, a dog and a white picket fence. That's the idea. So let's just talk about the mom, dad, and 2 kids, right? Their policy was, their PTO and vacation policy was designed around that. Their sick policy was designed around that. Individuals, white individuals, or even other individuals who had 1 or just 2 kids, but also had the structure that supported whiteness in that, they were successful in that. They could save a lot of PTO time because they were given enough when the policy was created. It was designed that they would be able to just handle their needs of those 2 children and have a little bit extra left over. It accounted for just all these different things, that these factors in a 2-parent and 2-kid household, right? Well, then comes along someone like myself, a woman who has 6 children and who's divorced and single now. And, baby number 1 and baby number 2, or kid 1, kid 2 gets sick. Like, the structure of the white family, there's those 2 kids get sick and you have enough. Well, I have enough for my first 2 children, but then when my 2nd and 3rd child gets sick, and then my 4th and 5th child gets sick, and they do it consecutively, because if you know anything about big families or just families in general, sicknesses tend to run through the whole entire household. So then when the 3rd and 4th child gets sick, and the 5th and 6th child, while I may have had enough PTO for the 1st and 2nd child who got sick, I no longer had enough PTO for the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th child. And then when I'm coming to address that I need more time to take off for my children, because I don't fit within the structure that was created, because I wasn't included in what they created, now I'm the problem. As now my children are a problem. Now my family structure, now me and all my values, everything about me is the problem, as opposed to this structure, this policy that has been created. So again, when you're talking about inclusion and policymaking and decision-making tables, you're ensuring that not only is there diversity of thought, diversity of values, diversity of people, diversity of cultures, of races represented at your table, that then when they are at that table, they're not just there like teddy bears. They're not just there like puppets. They're there as fully functioning individuals with different thought processes, different values, that are all coming to put it into this bowl. And that when it's put in there, it is addressing, and then whatever comes out of that bowl, what it addresses, it addresses everything. So now we might have a policy that equitably says, if you have 2 children, we're going to provide you with this amount of time, because generally that's all you need. And 2 people a family who has 2 children, if you have 2 children who have 2 children, they will find that still works for them. And then that same structure will say, but if you have a family that has 4, we're going to provide you with double. Or if you have a family of 6, we're going to provide you with triple. That's equity and inclusion together. That's actual inclusion. And that's what you should be reaching for in your policy creation. That's acknowledging barriers that exist, and then making sure that those people who are affected by those barriers, that they are able to be successful because you provided what they actually needed. Remember that personalization. Inclusion, like I said, it's ensuring that all that difference is around the table, but that also it's included into whatever new policy is being created. That takes time. That takes work. It doesn't get done if you never start. It doesn't get done if you just sit back and say, that's too much work for us. It doesn't happen. Okay. But it's possible, and you need to get started on that. And this is, and you as in organizations, businesses, churches, leadership, family members, husband, wives, whatever structure it is that you're in, understanding what anti-racism, diversity, equity, inclusion, and how it impacts you, and the decisions that you're making on a day-to-day basis, how it impacts your fellow person that you are communicating with, because we all know that we're interdependent. We're human beings. We're all interdependent. You know what I'm saying? So how those things impact those other ones who are around you, it matters. And that's why you need to, begin to make those changes ASAP. What is racism and anti-racism? Because racism is a little bit longer definition than anti-racism, we'll go with racism first. Racism it's the marginalization and the oppression of people of color based on a socially constructed racial hierarchy that privileges white people. It's the marginalization and oppression of people of color based on a social construction of racial hierarchy that privileges white people. And it's coupled with power. So racism and discrimination. Oh, did I just say it right? I forgot discrimination. Sorry, people. I totally lost that word for a minute. Racism and discrimination are the same almost. They are the same up until they're not. And so they're not the same at the point of power. Okay. They're not the same at the point of power. Discrimination can impact large groups of people just as racism does. It can, and it has, and it does. It still does. But at the point of power, at the point of codification, at the point of legalizing your discrimination, which America has done, which is why we talk historically about these conditions and how they manifest and how they were created. That's where racism and discrimination part ways at. Because racism has been woven into the fabric of American society. Again, we don't talk a lot about the world and how racism impacts it, but it also does. We stick with kind of like, this continent. Anyways, so again, racism is marginalization, the oppression of people of color based on social construction of racial hierarchy coupled with power, okay? And it benefits white people and it benefits whiteness. And we talk about we don't want it to just be white people only, because Black and brown individuals 100% can operate and do operate under whiteness because it's more lucrative. Actually, it's more lucrative. It's more peaceful. It seems safer to them up until it's not, but it does seem safer to some Black individuals, which, it was designed for it to seem safer that way. But, so whiteness and it impacts others, not just white people alone, but that's what racism is. Racism is, again, it's coupled with power, and that's how it distinguishes itself from discrimination. What is anti-racism? Anti-racism is simply being aware of what racism is, how racism impacts or plays out in our everyday lives, especially in our places of employment, especially in laws, especially in legislation, especially in schools, especially in curriculum. Anti-racism is understanding how these things impact it, and then being intentional about standing against it, resisting it, standing against it, resisting it, and dismantling it intentionally. That's what anti-racism is. So you got to know what racism is in order to be anti-racist. And everyone should be anti-racism. I mentioned before that, Black and brown individuals should be those who are relied upon and looked to, and, they should be studying this information because it's changing all the time. Racism and the way it operates, it changes through the years. And again, historically, we could find and look and see how, different laws and things that were created, how Black and brown individuals at some point in history were able to, for example, we had separate but equal, at one time. And then eventually, I think Brown versus Board of Education came around and it says separate is not equal. And yet you'll find that today schools are more segregated than ever. Okay, that's called one, white backlash. And then two, it's also the way that racism shifts in order to maintain its position of power and authority. So before, like I said, we had our separate but equal. I think that was a Dred Scott decision. Separate is supposedly equal. We knew that it never was. It was never going to be equal. It was never going to be. And then we said, okay, because separate but equal is not actually equal, let's go ahead and say separate. That there is that. We reject. Separate but equal. No more. We're not going to have that. Okay, let's say that. So we did, and we said let's go with integration, and we began all this integration into schools and different things like that, and public places and stuff. And then we noticed that. There's called white flight, which is a form of backlash from whiteness, who said, okay, you changed the laws and said that we have to integrate and mingle with Black folks, but we're going to just go and set up our schools and then charge high amounts of money that we know that they can't afford because we've intentionally kept them from economic power. Consistently, we're still today keeping Black and brown individuals from economic power. And we're going to go set up our own systems. And then we still have the same thing. We still have, these schools that we still have separate and not equal, But again, if you don't understand how racism works, then you can't be anti-racist, which is why we have these conversations, okay? Which is why we have these conversations. So let's get right to the topic of today. We are right at our mark that I like to be at in order to start talking about the conversation of today. So we're talking whiteness does not interpret for anti-racism, diversity, equity, inclusion, and or belonging. Whiteness does not interpret for it. Whiteness does not interpret for it. So as we mentioned, whiteness itself is the culture of whiteness. Whiteness is the colonized way of thinking. Whiteness is a particular professional. It's the culture. It's this idea that the two children, two-parent home. That's the norm. That's what we should see. Whiteness is most of your videos showing white women who are thin and that being the ideology and the preference and the standard for how women should look. Right. That's whiteness. Whiteness is heroes. White men who are heroes and who are, there to save the day. Whiteness is a culture of recognizing and being specific about the help being always Black and brown individuals. It's shows and TV and books where, white people are always the center character. Their conversations are what leads, even in movies that, it irritates me a lot of times, even in movies where Black and brown individuals are lead on those movies, the script is very white. It's very whitewashed. And as an African-American person or a brown person, when you're watching these scripts, because you are Black and or brown, you recognize that we would never do that. Like, who wrote this script? Clearly somebody white wrote the scripts. Clearly someone from a culture of whiteness who have normalized their behavior, normalized their responses. That's who wrote the script, and they're just coming out of a Black mouth. Okay, that's what whiteness is. It's normalizing the culture of whiteness. It's normalizing this idea that most white people are, these individuals who are looking out for the good. It's normalizing that Christianity and individuals who are Christians are kind. That it normalizes that. It tells that lie. How you know that it's telling that lie is you just have to look around you. You just have to look around you. And this is not a religious show, so we don't talk a whole lot about religion on here, but we will, because religion and whiteness and the way our nation was structured, that intersection often comes up. But when we're talking about Christianity, if you're reading the Bible ever, you'll notice that the Jesus in the Bible, he acts and thinks much differently than most Christians of today, than most Christians throughout the 400-year history of this nation. Understand? Jesus did not, in the Old or New Testament, especially the New Testament, but Jesus did not, abuse people. And he was for he was for socialism, and whiteness is actually for socialism as well. It just depends on how it looks to them, whether or not they agree with it. But again, whiteness, that's the culture of whiteness. Okay. Whiteness, that culture, and again, we could spend some time on that, and I have, and you can go back to that show and watch it. But whiteness does not interpret for anti-racism, diversity, and equity inclusion. The culture of whiteness does not interpret for it. And this is an important conversation for us to have, because so much of our diversity, equity, inclusion, anti-racism initiatives, programming, planning, etc., comes through the lens of whiteness. And it does not interpret for these things. It cannot interpret for these things. Okay. So for example, the structure of your DEI programming, initiatives, planning, etc., it needs to decenter whiteness. It needs to say, if you are, aware of, and if you're serious about DEI, your actual structure of it should have white people in the space of listeners. They should be in the space of supporters, protectors, and space makers. They should not be leading, or leading decision-making on DEI, anti-racism. They just shouldn't. Especially now, even if white individuals are doing their homework, say they're reading books and they're attending shows like this, watching them, and they're attending conferences and, becoming masters and learners at this, even they should still always remain in a space of support. Now, does that mean they can't lead on occasion something? No, that's not what that's saying. Yes, they actually could lead on occasion something, but their leading should be with the support and direction of black and brownness. So we talk about whiteness. Let's talk about blackness and brownness. Okay, and those are just the cultures of black and brown individuals. Their leading should be at the direction of black and brownness, whiteness leading these things. The feelings of white folks when it comes to, whiteness leading or directing or, having any real involvement in anti-racism and DEI ideology and creation. The feelings of whiteness should not be centrally focused. What we know historically, and it's still happening today, is that when we center white feelings, when we center whiteness and their feelings, they're always going to be offended, hurt, angry, and resistant. Whiteness is it. Anti-racism DEI work. It is intentional about decolonizing, destructuring, dismantling, destroying this idea that one culture needs to be the standard for us all in everything. It's intentional about recognizing and acknowledging and holding accountable and responsible our structures that were designed to uplift whiteness and to depress and oppress everything that's not. In that structure, whiteness is always going to be hurt, angry, upset, and offended. It's always because we're trying to destroy this idea that this is the only way that we can survive or standard that we should live by. Blackness, anti-racism DEI work, brownness, since we're going to use those two terms tonight, it says we should be inclusive of all. It says whiteness, just as a different value system, as long as that value system doesn't oppress others, should be acknowledged and respected as long as it doesn't oppress others, okay? And when that system does oppress others, then it should be completely destroyed. But you as whiteness and your culture, your apple pies and your Christmas holidays and your, that stuff shouldn't necessarily be destroyed unless it's oppressing others. So blackness and anti-racism, diversity and inclusion, brownness, it's not saying destroy everything about you and then just bring in this. It says, no, we want all of us to be included. And when we intersect, when white women and black women intersect, if and when there's oppression among them, that's what we're going to destroy. But the difference is we want those. We want you to accept ours, and we already, have to accept yours. But there's some good things in white culture. There's some good stuff there, sometimes you have to find it, but there is some good stuff there, But anyway, so because whiteness was designed to destroy and conquer and dismantle and just really destroy everything else but itself. When blackness, anti-racism, diversity, inclusion, and brownness comes in and says that, hey, we're going to fix all these things, whiteness is always going to be hurt, angry, offended, resistant, and upset. It's always going to have its feelings hurt. You'll see this playing out in your DEI stuff. White women especially, because a lot of them are in these spaces with us, black and brown individuals who are working on this work. White women especially, again, just because they're in the space with us, are highly offended, highly resistant, highly upset, when we have to, address issues and things that are causing harm. Because again, this is their system that they've been committed to. And, it means they're going to change and they don't want to, a lot of times. And you're going to see this everywhere you go. which is why whiteness should not be interpreting anti-racism, diversity, equity, inclusion. It cannot, not to fidelity. Okay, it cannot. Anti-racism and DEI work needs to focus on the experiences of Black and brown individuals. Anti-racism and DEI work should not be focused on whether or not the whiteness in the room is comfortable with the conversations. It just shouldn't. Okay. Now, might we let white individuals know that when we're having these conversations that, self-care is the thing and you should take care of yourself? Yeah, 100%. But creating around white feelings is not what DEI and anti-racism work should ever have to do or do. It should not, we shouldn't expect it of them, okay? And we should be relying on the experiences of Black and brown individuals. We should be relying on telling those experiences from their perspective, which would be from a perspective of strength, which would be from a perspective of saying they need to be held accountable, okay? That's the lens that we use when we're talking DEI work. It should be from a lens of instruction. So whiteness, when it's talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, anti-racism, it should be from the space of I am trying to learn from you, or I am trying to make space for you to teach this, okay? That's the lens that whiteness should be engaged in when it comes to DEI and anti-racism work. This work should focus on accountability for whiteness, okay? What we know, and history tells us, when and if we ever, because we don't ever do it long enough to see the long-term impacts and long-term effects of it, and the backlashes are often so much longer than our change or our reformation that we never get to really see what happens. But when and if we ever decide to focus on accountability, then we're going to see some real changes. Excuse me. And whiteness, when it's being held accountable, when we're focusing on accountability, the focus should not be on, because what whiteness has done historically is it has created, affirmative action, and it has ensured that it has physically met affirmative action. And in that, it's always put in very obvious wording to protect itself should it not do what the policy says it should do. When we're talking true diversity, equity, inclusion, anti-racism, and we're not censoring whiteness, then we know that the focus will be on accountability. The focus will be on not finding ways around it. The focus will be intentional that says there is no way around this. Either it's like this or it's not, period. And you're going to be held accountable to that. Because history tells us and shows us that whiteness, the culture of whiteness, when it does things to, it does some type of, like I said, affirmative action, it finds a way to ensure that it stays on top. That's what it does. Well, if we're going to be creating something that's different than that, then we've got to find a way to make sure that it does not stay on top, that it is held accountable, okay? And again, you're going through the lens of Black and brown individuals. And if you're leaning heavily on their solutions and ideas, then that's what's going to be created, because they're going to tell you need accountability. There is no way around this accountability. We don't need this wording. I was sitting in a meeting some time ago, and we spent almost a half an hour, I think 45 minutes, trying to name an activity. And part of the conversation during that time, I kept highlighting the term, the phrase, the name that we're going to call what we are doing is so insignificant to what we are doing. And yet you'll find in whiteness that naming something is more important than doing the something. When you're not focusing on whiteness, when you're not allowing whiteness to lead DEI and anti-racism work, then you'll actually get, one, work done, and two, time won't be wasted on what's the best name for it, or what's the best terminology for it, or how can I say it pretty, or how can I say it professionally so that others can ooh and ah at my performance, because that's all it is. Like I said today, I heard this term, and you've all heard it before, this dog and pony show. It's this surface level change that looks like I've done something, affirmative action, when in actuality, who was most benefited from affirmative action was white women. Okay, not who it was actually intended for, and that was for Black and brown individuals. It was intended for them, but who was most benefited by it was white women. Because again, whiteness is good at making it sound good, at writing out something good, and then figuring out ways to get around everything they said so that they can still remain on top. Your employers, family members, friends, enemies, your employees, your colleagues, if and when you're ever doing DEI and anti-racism work correctly, if you're implementing it from the lens of those that have been oppressed, from their solutions, from their identified problems, and then the solutions to those problems, if and when you ever, the individuals who are around you, they'll see that transformation. If in your organizations, white people and whiteness, if in your organizations, one, the conditions don't change after you've done your DEI work, if the conditions don't change of the people. So that doesn't mean you're going and, putting out a bunch of stuff that looks differently, putting, pictures up on the wall of Black individuals, and brown individuals and saying, let's have a one-pager about them during the month of February, about these individuals. And then we're done. And then the conditions, they're still being suspended too often. The school to prison pipeline is alive and well. You don't have that many of Black and brown individuals in positions of authority and leadership and on the VP team and the suite and the VP suite. Your policies haven't gone through some type of drastic transformation. If that's not happening, then you are just simply doing it's being done through the lens of whiteness, which is simply surface level and dog and pony shows always when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, and true belonging initiatives. Okay, so that's how you know when whiteness is in control and why whiteness should not be in control, and why whiteness does not interpret for anti-racism, diversity, equity, inclusion. Anti-racism and DEI works needs to focus on the quantitative and qualitative changes. You can quantify your DEI and anti-racism changes. You can quantify if you're actually doing it right. Your landscape is going to change. Your culture is going to change. It's going to look different. It's going to be transformed. People are going to walk in and they're not going to know, they're not going to recognize the same space. It might be a little bit familiar, maybe, but for the most part, they're going to like this. The feel of this place is different. And Black and brown individuals are going to be happier. That's a change that you'll be able to recognize. Like I said, policy should be transformed, Individuals who are not committed to anti-racist DEI work should not lead or overshadow this work at all. That includes Black and brown individuals, because again, like I mentioned, they can operate for and through and about whiteness. We're living in a society that has upheld whiteness as a standard, as the standard for the last 400 plus years. Whiteness that has been intentional about separating and dividing Black and brown peoples from each other in order to keep them suppressed and weak. Okay, whiteness that has awarded and rewarded Black and brown individuals who have rejected or stepped away from their own people. Okay, whiteness rewards that. Whiteness gives those individuals, more money, more recognition, more jobs, whatever. Black and brown individuals, and white people too, especially, unless they are committed to anti-racism DEI work, should not lead or overshadow the work of DEI at all. Because again, they're operating through whiteness, and whiteness does not interpret for diversity, equity, inclusion, anti-racism. So they should have no say in the work of DEI practitioners at all. You setting up your organizations and your job, and your organizations and your businesses, DEI should not be housed in HR. They are two total different worlds, two completely different worlds. Your HR director should not wear a double hat as your DEI director. They are two total different worlds, and they are full job descriptions all by themselves. Okay, your DEI, if anything, your HR should be housed under DEI. Everything that's going through HR should be going through a lens of diversity, equity, inclusion, anti-racism. That's what it should have to filter through that, if anything. And actually, not if, actually, that's how it should happen. HR should have to filter through DEI. Okay, but it should not be, DEI should never be under HR at all. If anything, they're, distant brothers and sisters. They're worlds apart, okay? Anti-racism and DEI should be intentional and insistent on leading with messages that are from exclusive Black and Brown communities, from those communities that have been oppressed. I've said this before, and I'm going to always say it. Those closest to the problem are closest to the solution, but furthest from the resources and power. Listen, what history has told us and shown us is that all of the messages that we have gotten are from the perspective of the conqueror, okay? So white individuals, and they've only conquered because of their commitment to absolutely no morals whatsoever, and you look through history and you look at, Emmett Till, for one example, of just their, the whole Emmett Till situation, just whiteness's commitment to absolutely no morals, no holdouts at all. It still operates like that, okay? Because of that, you can't have, because of that, you have to be intentional that the messages that you're getting, that everything that you're using to educate yourself, to educate others, that it is coming from the perspective of the historically and purposefully excluded groups, right? Because again, those who have been excluded and those who are from marginalized communities, we are 100%, when we've educated ourselves, aware of the issue, and then we also have the solution to it, okay? Whiteness does not have a solution to a problem that it created. It does not. It can't, because it's like killing itself, okay? There's that self-preservation, it's alive and well in every culture, okay? Whiteness is self-preserving. It seeks out every which way. Our example of, separate but equal, then finally separate but equal is no longer true, and then white flight, okay? It found a way to keep doing separate but equal, okay? And it's still that way today. Why do you think we have different communities within one city where, that's the Black side, that's the white side, that's the, whatever side? Because whiteness is still figuring out ways to stay on top. Why do you think we still have this great wage gap between Black women and white men? And Black women and white women? Why do you think we still have these wage gaps? Who's determining these wages? It's not, your ancestors. It's today's people. They're your HR directors, and whoever else you're listening to do these analysis on these jobs and how much money should be paid. They're determining that, these positions that are held by Black and Brown individuals, that by our people who are, those who are essential workers, oftentimes held by Black and Brown individuals, they're determining that your work is not as great as this individual who's sitting in a room in an office, with windows all around them, doing not much work, okay? Who's making plans and creating stuff that does not seek or fit your needs, okay? So whiteness just does not interpret for anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And you cannot rely on whiteness to do that, because it's always going to self-preserve. So in your anti-racism and DEI work, and I'm going to finish up because I need to be done here, you need to be making sure, and this is a good message for us to end on, you need to be making sure that your efforts are always filtered through the lens of true DEI and anti-racism Black and Brown people. Okay, now does that mean that white people can't do some research on it? Yeah, they can, but let me be very clear. You've got to do an extreme amount of research, decolonization, destructuring within yourself, denying of your culture and your normalcy in order to accept something different. Most white people don't do that. Most, okay? There are like a very minuscule amount of white individuals and whiteness who do that. So for the most part, all of your stuff, your resources, your books, your videos, your ideas, your solutions, the problems, all that should be guided by and from those who are closest to those problems, those who are most acquainted with those problems, those who are educating themselves on how to fix those problems, those who have lived in those spaces, and they already know how to do those problems. Every Black and Brown individual almost, who's grown up in some type of poverty or disadvantaged position, and most of us have a PhD in the problems that we have. And a master's, a lot of us, some of them, I say I have a PhD, but a lot of us have masters in the solutions. That's where we should be getting all our information from. So again, whiteness does not interpret for DEI, anti-racism work. You should not be listening to them. They should not be guiding anything. They should not be, the heads of DEI practitioners. They just should not. Okay, not if you actually want to see real change. All right, thank you so much for joining another meeting of Diverse Minds with Keisha Hamilton here on Wednesday, November 8th. I appreciate you coming, and I am hoping to see you all next week. Remember, check out my website at diversemindsconsulting.com. I'll put that in the comments today, but www.diversemindsconsulting.com. Check that out for all the different things that we offer. You're welcome to donate to the Wednesday night shows if you want to. You check out our website and it does give instructions on how to do that should you choose to. And I will see you all next week for another meeting of Diverse Minds with Keisha Hamilton. Thank you. Bye.